Minister. Dress rehearsal. Hands up. Maybe you should take your seats in two. Dress rehearsal. And we do it again. I got the call that he was coming down the corridor. Please stand for the arrival of our Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. Good morning, Prime Minister. Please remain standing for the playing of the national anthem. Please remain standing as I invite Pastor Wenford Henry for invocation.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, this is not an ordinary year for us as disaster risk managers. Especially most of our leaders will be focusing on a very special event. But, oh Lord, as we come this morning for this another council meeting, we are thankful for your presence with us. In a very special way, we are thankful for the way you have led last year. And in spite of our experiences with burial and other events, you were there with us and for us. You provided the necessary resources that we're able to respond in a very positive way. We are thankful for Jamaica and for the position you have placed her, that at this time, oh God, we have the resources that we could have responded, and even now, we will be able, if we are to experience another event, to able to respond. So we give you thanks for our leaders, especially our Prime Minister, the most Honorable Andrew Michael Holness, for the other team members, the Minister of Local Government and Community Development, for the Minister of Local Government and Community Development, and for all the other stakeholders. We thank you for the NGO sectors, the Food for the Poor, the Salvation Army, Jamaica Red Cross, ADRA, for our private sectors, and all those volunteers, hundreds of volunteers, who you have provided to assist in times of disasters. We thank you for them. And now we pray, oh God, that you will bless all of us with health and strength, that comes what may this year, we'll be able to answer the call. We are thankful in a very special way for our police services and for the army, for the work they are doing in this aspect of disaster risk management. But especially on the crime front, oh God, we are so thankful for them. They have placed their lives on the line for all of us. And more time we come to talk about hurricanes and earthquakes. But Lord, we have a crisis of crime in this land. And we have seen how you have used them and the leadership of this country to tame this monster. And we place in a very special way this morning before you, that you'll continue to strengthen them, continue to give them vision, and continue to unite them, oh God, as they face this monster. Oh God, we have heard of so many guns being discovered. Oh God, we wonder what is happening. Are we in Ukraine? What is happening in Jamaica? So we ask you, God, to give our Prime Minister the focus, that he'll keep on blinders and keep his eye fixed on the most important mission, to keep the people of Jamaica safe. Bless the security forces. Help them, oh God, that they'll be united and be steadfast to do the work you have placed before them, and so that we all can rejoice that we can live in a safe and wonderful Jamaica. We heard, oh God, the external folks are praising us. Oh God, we got good news about the upgrading of the status where they place our tourism sector in. And we heard, oh God, others are now saying this is on par with so many countries for favorable rating. We are rejoicing for this news. And we come this morning to focus on this hurricane season. And you have been there for us in the past. And we know, oh God, with our leadership, with the security forces, with the NWA, with the various government ministries, the private sector, the international partners, World Food Program, UNICEF, and all the others, you have united us to keep our focus on helping the most vulnerable in this country. And we as a family are united to face comes what may. And we are thankful that you promise you will never leave us nor forsake us. So we can go forward with confidence, knowing that you have our best interest at heart. And we unite as a team now to do our best for this beautiful land we call Jamaica. Thank you now for hearing us, and be with us in a very special way today. Be with our presenters, and may all of us leave here resolved to do our best to serve this wonderful nation, Jamaica land we love. We ask for Christ's sake. Amen and amen.
Amen. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. What a prayer. I'm sure God has heard. And I hear a songwriter say, and when we pray, he answers. Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mrs. Natalie Garvey, representing the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, my own minister, Cabinet Ministers and Minister of State, Honorable Audrey Sewell, Cabinet Secretary. Other permanent secretaries represented here today and their representatives. Vice Admiral Antoinette Wims Gorman, Chief of Defense Staff. Dr. Kevin Blake, Commissioner of Police. Mr. Kevin Horton, Acting Commissioner, Jamaica Fire Brigade. Mr. Raj Mason, Commissioner, Correctional Services. Mr. Richard Thompson, Acting Director General, Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. Mayors of the respective towns and chairmen of the municipal corporations. Executive heads of the public and private sector. Other members of the council and members who are joining us virtually. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. As the event is being carried live, let me also acknowledge the listening public and to establish at this time that the council meeting of the National Disaster Risk Management Council for 2025 is now called to order. Prime Minister, I would like to report that we have received apologies from a few of our members. Senator Johnson Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, our Financial Secretary, Mayor Richard Vernon from St. James. He's represented this morning by his Deputy Mayor, Mayor Sheridan Samuels, Deputy Prime Minister, and our Minister of National Security. If there are other apologies that have not been so indicated to me, I would invite that it now be so indicated for the purposes of the records. There being Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, so. Let the record so reflect, as I had not got those officially. As we are aware, the council meeting of the National Disaster Risk Management Council is to be convened at least once annually. There are some members, however, who may not be so familiar with its function. Just to summarize, the council is comprised of all cabinet ministers. It's chaired by our Prime Minister. Deputy Chairman is our own Minister, Honorable Desmond McKenzie, who has responsibility for disaster management activities within the country. All permanent secretaries, including the Financial Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary, and all the members therein are listed under the second schedule of the Disaster Risk Management Act of 2025. And Section 6 outlines that the chairman may invite at any meeting of the council such other persons as the chairman deems fit. I believe we have with us this morning also Prime Minister, members of the team that was charged to look on the disaster management activities from last year in the person of Miss Trudy Deans. I'm looking in the audience. I'm not seeing her. Just stand for me, please, so that those who are not familiar with you can see you. So that is Miss Trudy Deans, in the absence of our ambassador, Anthony Anderson. She has, I believe, is representing this morning. And I believe also there may be other members who are representing other agencies, sir, such as the National Environment and Planning Agency, and some permanent secretaries who have not been able to join virtually. Their representatives have joined us virtually. In addition, Section 7 sets out the function as under Section 17 of the Act to advise that the council meeting shall be convened to review and advise on national strategies for disaster management, review the state of disaster management in Jamaica, and report its findings at least once annually to the Cabinet to facilitate effective national coordination of preparedness for, response to, and recovery from any disaster or emergency situation, and collaboration of stakeholders in relation thereto. That being said, Mr. Chairman, our Prime Minister, I will now invite Honorable Favour Williams, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, to bring some brief remarks.
Thank you, PS. Good morning, everyone. And I know PS went through the very long list, the protocol list, so I would just acknowledge that. But let me acknowledge Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. Of course, we have MP Nita Garvey here representing the Leader of the Opposition. Let me acknowledge as well our host minister, Minister Mackenzie, and to say colleague ministers and MPs, heads of our Joint Security Forces, members of our fire services, CAPSECs, PSs, mayors, deputy mayors, heads of agencies and departments, members of the media, good morning. Despite the Saharan dust, I still want to say good morning to everyone. In the face of what we know to be increased intensity of weather-related events, we would have been in a very bad place when Beryl struck if we had not implemented our national natural disaster risk financing policy. And because it's such a long phrase, I'm going to just call it the NNDRFP. It has many layers of what we call shock absorbers for the economy. Since then, we have increased our disaster coverage to ensure we have the financial flexibility to meet natural disasters. So the NNDRFP allows the government to prepare financially for natural disasters. The policy ensures funds are available for response and recovery efforts. Had this government not had the foresight to ensure we had this multi-layered risk-absorbing facility in place when Category 5 Hurricane Beryl hit, we would not have been able to do the emergency repairs to public infrastructure, cleanup and relief recovery activities, as well as the social expenditure to assist the indigent and other vulnerable populations. So currently, our NNDRF cushion stands at approximately $130.6 billion in terms of coverage. How much we can draw down on that will depend on the severity of the disaster. Our disaster financing policy takes into consideration those events that are high frequency but low severity, such as floods, and these can be dealt with through budget reallocation or reserve and contingency funds to provide immediate resources for relief efforts. For the higher severity, low frequency events such as hurricanes, we have to use insurance instruments such as the facility that we have with CREF, our Caribbean partner. And it says, in times of disaster, or policy, that is, start with what we can reallocate, what we can defer, what we can delay or cancel. And if that is not enough, go to the next layer, the contingency fund and the National Disaster Fund. This is $4.8 billion. Then you go to the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund that has $1 billion. Together, these two funds total $5.8 billion and are Jamaica's own resources. And if those are not enough, the next layer would be two contingent credit arrangements, thanks to our international partners. And I'm pleased to note that on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025, an additional facility was added for an amount of $6.5 billion to bring the disaster coverage for Jamaica, again, just to reiterate that number, to $130.6 billion. Of course, how much we can access will depend on the severity of the disaster. An advantage of the catastrophe financing coverage we have in place is that it is parametric, meaning there are predefined thresholds and predefined payouts. So if the thresholds are met, funds are triggered, and the recovery work can get started almost immediately. Compare this with traditional insurance, in which there would have to be a detailed damage assessment, which, as you know, could take months of backing and forthing and agreeing and disagreeing about what's damaged, what's not damaged. And during that time, as you can imagine, of this detailed damage assessment, you could see how people, the infrastructure, and the GDP of the country would be suffering, and how slow that process would be in addressing recovery efforts. The commitment of this government is to continue strengthening our multi-layered national natural disaster risk financing policies and to fill in any gaps that we have. I will always give former Minister Nigel Clarke credit for the work that he started to establish this. We are continuing that work and are ensuring that these facilities remain in place for the benefit of the people of Jamaica, because we understand our geographic location in a hurricane belt and that we need to be prepared well ahead of that, not thinking when we are in it what we are going to do, but we would have already had the plans and the financing in place to support that. So ladies and gentlemen, I am proud this morning to speak with you and just to let you know the financing backative, as we would say in Jamaica, that is in place for us to help us to recover from natural disasters that we know will continue to be in our future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll now invite Honorable Desmond Mackenzie to the podium, and this is to formally also hand over to him. He'll take charge of the meeting at this time, and we'll do the introductions of our Prime Minister.
Thank you, my hard-working Permanent Secretary, and before I make the formal acknowledgement, I want to thank the staff of the Ministry of Local Government for preparing this room for today's function. I think they deserve a big round of applause, and I want to thank working closely with the ODPEM. Most Honorable Prime Minister, Member of Parliament Nita Edley, colleague, Cabinet Ministers, Minister of State, Madam Garvey. Other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The morning session belongs to the Most Honorable Prime Minister. But I want to give the country the assurance that the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management is fully equipped, financially and otherwise, as we go into what is anticipated to be a very active hurricane season. I want to use the opportunity this morning, as I did last Wednesday in Parliament, to urge Jamaicans not to turn their backs on the various advices that will come. We saw the effects of Berry last year, and it was because we were proactive last year we were able to come back in a way that a lot of people didn't expect us to. It was because of that collective response from all of us as Jamaicans. So as we prepare for this hurricane season, over some 900 shelters have been inspected and is ready. The Ministry of Labor has enough supplies. And following this portion of the meeting, we will meet in the business session of the council to go into details. So at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, those who are joining us online and those out there in Radioland, I want us now to welcome, to address not just the council but the country on Jamaica's state of readiness as we enter the hurricane season for the year 25. Let's welcome the most Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Andrew Michael Holness.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I stand on the protocols that you so appropriately established and in setting the example of being efficient with time. It is always good to have assembled before me the leaders of the institutions and machinery of the state as we prepare for the inevitable, naturally occurring 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. This is now my 10th. This is now my 10th such meeting to mobilize and help to develop within the leaders the frame of mind to get ready in the event that we are actually hit by a weather event in the Atlantic hurricane season. June 1 is not just a notional date. It is for policymakers, practitioners, politicians, bureaucrats, public and civil servants, members of the security forces, our teachers and nurses, our local government practitioners, our journalists, our civil response and emergency response. Am I leaving out any category? Essentially all Jamaicans. June 1 is an important marker on the calendar. It is the beginning of the hurricane season. And so what we are gathered here to do is not just ceremonial. It is of real import, real impact. And so that is the first kind of base attitude that must be set in determining and establishing the state of readiness and the frame of mind. That the calling together of this committee is of real importance. It is a signal to the machinery of the state that we are now officially in this season of risk and threat, and we must all now adopt a mindset of readiness. Disasters are no longer distant or occasional threats. They are increasingly becoming frequent, more intense, and more complex. From earthquakes that destabilize entire regions to wildfires that erase communities, and you would have seen recently a landslide, a glacier in Switzerland that totally wiped out a community. These are disasters that are now happening more frequently. And their impacts are significant. You would have seen, obviously, the wildfires in California that totally wiped out communities. The global disaster risk landscape is evolving at a pace that challenges the traditional models of preparedness and recovery. For small island developing states like Jamaica, one extreme weather event is enough to undo years of hard-earned economic progress. And with climate change accelerating, these will only grow more disruptive. I want to elucidate this point a bit. We are accustomed to seeing weather events that could be considered once in 50 years in terms of its occurrence. But in the last 20 or 30 years, we're seeing weather events that would normally occur once in every 50 occurring, sometimes as many as 1 in 10. So you're seeing these major events occurring every decade. And maybe even more often than that. And so we have to be prepared. The level of preparedness that we have cannot be the level of preparedness where you're expecting a 1 in 50 year return. You have to be at the level where your preparedness is, let's be prepared because it could happen every year. That's the level of preparedness that we will have to have. The level of disruption as well is far more significant because of the interconnectedness and complexity of our society. So one weather event can trigger not just displacement of citizens because they have lost their homes. You're going to now have to look at the health situations that can follow, the law and order situations that can follow, the impact on the other areas of the economy, particularly those that are directly related to agriculture, the impact on trade because of the dislocation of supply chains. So it becomes very complex. So the preparedness of the nation is not just about being able to conduct a humanitarian exercise when a disaster hit. All right? You have to now be prepared to deal with the energy crisis that could come, the trade crisis that could come, the impact on the economy in terms of inflation when goods get scarce, the citizen safety and security issues that could happen, all elements of any consideration as to the stability of the society must be considered in preparedness when such disasters strike. We have long accepted the undeniable link between poverty and disaster vulnerability. Those with the least often bear the greatest burden. And that is an absolutely true statement. It is the poor that is most affected by disasters. So when we are planning our preparedness response, we must be thinking about, first and foremost, who are the most vulnerable and who are the persons without means to be able to recover on their own. So that must be a prime consideration in our disaster recovery. So I'm speaking to many heads of agencies and entities here. So if it is a matter for the local government to consider in your constituencies, and in your various localities, which community is going to be impacted, not just by the weather, not just by a flood, but from a socio-economic standpoint. Which community do you need to have stocks and resources pre-positioned and prepared to respond to? You have to be planning for that. If it is the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, you have to be thinking, how are you going to get resources to those persons who are on the PATH program and who would depend on your PATH checks? How are you going to get things to them quickly? Again, in the Ministry of Local Government, for those people who you have to take care of who are in the various infirmaries and homes, how are you going to have those resources because they're not in a position to help themselves? So, as Prime Minister, I've made it a national priority to mainstream disaster risk management into every tier of governance and every corner of our society. From land use planning and infrastructure development to climate adaptation and community education, we are building a culture of resilience that is data-driven, locally grounded, and globally informed. Let us begin with the facts. According to the International Displacement Monitoring Center and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, over 20 million people are displaced every year by climate-related disasters. These are not just numbers. Behind every statistic is a family torn apart, a child out of school, a community forced to start over. The economic toll is staggering. To the cost of rebuilding cities, rehabilitating survivors, and restoring services, these costs can reach billions of dollars. So in light of this, Jamaica has adopted a multi-pronged strategy to reduce risk, respond effectively, and build forward stronger. Our approach includes strengthening national institutions and legislation, and I'll speak about that a little later, investing in science, technology, and early warning systems, building capacity at the community level, aligning national planning frameworks with climate resilience, and ensuring that disaster risk reduction is cross-cutting, touching education, housing, health, infrastructure, energy, and the environment. We have also advanced the review of our national disaster risk management framework, and we are developing a new policy to ensure we are fit for purpose. One of our greatest assets in disaster management is communication. Thanks to our partners, including the government of Japan through JICA, we now have a robust national disaster emergency telecommunication system and public safety network. These allow us to disseminate real-time alerts, mobilize response teams, and reach even our most remote communities in times of crisis. But while we have made progress, we must be honest about where gaps remain. Now, following the devastation of Hurricane Beryl last year, we established the Disaster Risk Management Review Committee to assess our disaster preparedness and response efforts in the aftermath of the hurricane with a view to learning from the experience and strengthening our readiness and response to both natural and man-made hazards. The committee was chaired by Major General Anthony Anderson and comprised distinguished experts, including Dr. Paris Leahy, Ms. Trudy Deans, and Mr. Jonathan Brown, and I want to thank them for their work and contribution. Ms. Deans is here representing the committee. The committee undertook a comprehensive review of our disaster framework, identifying key vulnerabilities and priority areas for reform, from ODPEM's leadership role and the structure of that organization and its current state of leadership, and community preparedness, another critical element, specifically now looking at the various local government committees and community response organizations, to disaster financing, the role of the Ministry of Finance with the buffers created in our budgets and the insurance that we have signed on to. We looked at infrastructure resilience, specifically looking at the work of the NWA, the NWC, JPS, and we also examined the use of technology. And I'll say a few words on the use of technology a little later on in my presentation. While Jamaica has made significant strides in early warning systems, again, that is to be noted, and we again give our appreciation to the government of Japan through JICA for assisting us with the establishment of an emergency communication system. We have structured planning, particularly in the Ministry of Finance. I don't think anyone could complain about the speed at which the Ministry of Finance responded with the resources. I certainly didn't hear any complaints from the Minister of Labor and Social Security. I didn't hear any complaints from the Minister of Education. The response was swift. And I didn't hear any complaints either from the Minister of Local Government, except to say they want more. But I think the Ministry of Finance should be commented. I don't think that the country would immediately associate the Ministry of Finance with disaster preparedness and response. But, that is where it starts. If you don't have an economy, then you're going to be relying on other people to help you recover from your disaster. And I want to say as clearly as I can, what has changed in Jamaica in the last decade is that we are able as a country, right, with God's protection and blessings, we have been able to stand on our own 2 feet and respond effectively to disasters. That's a national achievement. And that is because we have run the economy well. So not only can the economy nyam, the economy can drink, the economy help you to recover from disaster. Right? The economy. So, but there are issues. We were spared the worst in our recent disaster, Hurricane Beryl. And being at the forefront of the response, I saw the gaps. I saw the potential threats. And what the role of leadership is, it is to ensure that even though you escaped the worst, you don't just sit back and say, it's past. You have to strengthen the institution so that if there were to be a return of the threat, you can genuinely be able to stand up to it. So there were some gaps. For example, we must improve the resilience of our utilities. The JPS must undertake a comprehensive review of its distribution network and replace those compromised and broken poles, and as quickly as possible, replace those that are needed to be replaced with concrete poles. Now, I know that they have started that work. There is a budget, a capital allocation for that, and that work must proceed right throughout the year with great speed and alacrity, so that, God forbid that there is any other disaster to come, that we are not without electricity in those areas for any extended period of time. And I know that the JPS is addressing that, but we must say it publicly, and we must hold them to account for it, to move very swiftly in ensuring that the distribution network is resilient and resistant to these weather events. As we examined the operations of the NWC, clearly, except for gravity-fed systems, once the electricity is out, then the entire country would be out of water. So the NWC has to develop independent power sources. It has to have its own backup strategy, its own backup capability. And so the government has started work towards ensuring that the critical areas for supply and distribution, that those pumping stations will have backup generators. That's a long-term objective, but we're going to ensure that we at least have some short-term capabilities. And it is a two-pronged strategy. One strategy is to solarize some of the pumping stations that we have so that we have independent power. And the other strategy is to introduce generators that can carry the pumps for a reasonable period of time should there be a failure in the electricity utility. And we have started that recently. In the Red Hills area, we opened a solar plant at one of our pumping stations, which will help in the event of a natural disaster, providing those panels aren't blown away, they remain firmly anchored. Then they would be able to generate electricity and keep those pumps going. Housing. The housing sector is growing rapidly in Jamaica. And the experience of Hurricane Gilbert would have seared into the minds of Jamaicans the importance of putting on their roofs, following the guidelines of the building codes. So a lot of Jamaicans would have moved away from zinc roofing to putting on concrete slabs. But we noticed that, and flying over the areas that were impacted by the recent Hurricane Beryl, and just looking at some of the roofs, and then when we went on the ground and examined, it was clear. Those roofs that did not use hurricane straps, those were the roofs that were destroyed. It was crystal clear. So it appears to me, and indeed coming out of the report, that the parish councils, the approval entities, and the Ministry of Local Government, through a national public campaign, must reinforce the building codes as it relates to roofs and the need to build according to code and use, in particular, hurricane straps to secure our roofs. But roofs were not the only areas of housing that were damaged. Windows. Many persons suffered water intrusion because of the kinds of windows that they used. And so there may have to be some guidance on that as to how to secure your windows during hurricanes and the types of windows to use to secure your homes during hurricanes. We also found that the houses that were particularly affected by the disaster, and again, this is not rocket science, were the houses that were built in areas that were known to be disaster prone. So people who built in the swamps or close to swamps, who built on the gully banks or close to the gully banks, who built on unstable slopes, those were the houses that were most affected. People who built in areas that are known for flooding. So, in a sense, Minister Mackenzie, we already know where the damage is going to take place. We will have to strengthen our settlement policy, our enforcement as it relates to where people settle and how they settle. And there are communities that are there for years, for decades. It's going to be very difficult to move them. You ask them to move, they don't want to move. They're emotionally connected to the community. But my own view is that if you know you're going to build in an area that is prone, the technology to build and build as safely as you can exists. In other communities, in other jurisdictions where you're building in low-lying areas, people build on stilts. They make provision for that because they know there's going to be a flood. They try to avoid building near the canal or the gully. These are just simple things that we can do. And our entities that are responsible for enforcing and responsible for building standards, these are things that we're going to have to look at and enforce, but at the same time encourage and help people to build wisely. Now, we know this is a very sensitive discussion because immediately the thought will come to mind, the government is trying to move me or displace. I think we need to move away from that because that's absolutely not what the government is trying to do. The government is trying to make you safe. And so the attitude must be one of, let's cooperate with the authorities to see how we can be safe in these areas. Because the truth is, the government can't relocate everyone all at once. We simply don't have the capacity. But for those that are in the extremely dangerous positions, if the government comes to you and says, listen, if there's a heavy rain, this slope is going to go. As we have done in an area called Wees Road in East Rural St. Andrew, where we have gone to people to say, all right, we'll help to relocate you. And they say, no, we'll stay. Some have accepted, and a few have decided that they will stay. I pray every day that nothing more happens and we don't have to send in the JDF and other response entities to try and keep those persons safe. But it is the reality. So I'm hopeful that the nation listening today and those people who know that they are in the disaster-prone areas, that the mindset needs to change, and maybe you need to start to approach your parish council or your member of parliament to say, can we start a process to either help build my resilience, improve the strength and structure of my home, or see how we can be relocated? I think that has to be the mindset now, given that you are going to have greater frequency and greater intensity of natural disasters that will affect your habitat and your home. Now, we must accelerate the expansion of early warning systems. And the government has been investing heavily in that. The Ministry of Economic Growth has been investing in that. We've recently installed a Doppler radar system and other systems right across Jamaica. We note that there is some pullback from NOAA in the United States. So we are going to have to make our own investments to ensure that we have enough early warnings should there be any disasters. And that is something that we're doing, and we will continue to increase our own capacity and indeed cooperate with other regional entities so that we have the information through early warning systems. Given the increased threat of sea level rise because of the climate change issues, we are going to have to take coastal protection much more seriously than we did in the past. Coastal protection is an expensive undertaking. Expensive. And I can tell you that a few weeks ago, I was in Southeast St. Mary looking at a coastal revetment project that was executed by JSF and the PIOJ, sponsored by the World Bank through a loan. And it was probably about a kilometer of revetment, and the cost was significant. But the way to think of it is that if we didn't do that revetment, and there was a supervening kind of weather event, it would have destroyed the single road connecting one end of the island to another. So you'd have to think about what would be the economic cost of not being able to come from Kingston through Junction, because that stretch in Anoto Bay, that road was totally destroyed. And that's how we have to think of it. We have done revetment works in downtown Kingston along Port Royal Street, and we have done some other revetment works in Montego Bay, particularly to secure the major investments that we have made in the Harmony Park, and that was several hundred billions of dollars of building revetments and other sea protection. So this is something that, Minister of Finance, you're going to see more calls on the budget for revetment works, seashore protection, because without that, it's not just the loss of landmass, but because of our historical settlement patterns, where most of our townships are close to the sea and sometimes at or below sea level, you know, these are things that we're going to have to take seriously in the future. The agricultural sector, I must say that I was very impressed with our farmers in Clarendon and Manchester and St. Elizabeth, in that belt, that they recovered very quickly. They were hit badly, but they recovered very quickly, and the Ministry of Agriculture was very quick to be in the field with the farmers doing the assessment. So I think we should give them commendations. The response was financial, but they did get some supplies, and I think we're going to have to kind of strengthen our response there to see how best we can help farmers, especially those that are utilizing grow houses like greenhouses and other covered agricultural technology. They suffered badly because of the damage to their greenhouses. So there needs to be, you know, greater outreach and education as to how to dismantle, how to protect, and whether or not there are actually technologies that are available that could be deployed to secure greenhouses in the event of these kinds of disasters. Again, let me say that the Ministry of Finance did well in terms of the mainstreaming of disaster risk in the whole financing process, whether it is through insurance, setting up buffers. And when we speak in this language of buffers and insurance, the average person may not immediately see why that is important. For decades before, we had established a disaster fund, and there was literally nothing in the disaster fund. But what this administration has done in the last decade is that every year we set aside a certain percentage of the budget and we place it in the disaster fund. So when we were hit by Beryl, there was a certain portion of the disaster response that we could fund immediately without having any fiscal impact, meaning without having to go and borrow or not spend on something in order to spend on the disaster response. And then we purchased some insurance, which were we able to call on that? Some of the CRIF, right? We called on the CRIF, and then we participated in a very innovative financing arrangement called the catastrophe bond. We didn't call on that because it didn't reach the parameter to trigger the call of those funding. But if it did, we would have it. So we have what is called a multi-layered response. In other words, we can respond out of our own resources that we saved, we can respond out of insurance that we bought, and we can respond out of a very innovative financing instrument called a catastrophe bond. And because of that, the citizen who is displaced can expect to get response from the government fairly rapidly. Now, at that point, I wish to make an appeal to every Jamaican. There is an expectation that in a disaster, the government would be at liberty to suspend or ignore the rules as it relates to how it disburses public resources. So for the citizen in distress to ask for ID, identification, you might be saying, my house blow down, all the documents lost, why you coming to ask me about ID and so forth. After disaster has passed and it goes to the Committee of Parliament, it is the same citizens who are going to say that, and represented by their parliamentarians, that the government gave grants to people who didn't exist. It's the same criticism is going to be leveled at the government that, we are not following the rules and that there is some corruption somewhere. So we can't suspend the rules. We understand the situation that you are in, but as you live in this democracy with the rules and laws that we have, you also need to prepare for a disaster by doing a couple of things. Firstly, your ID may be a physical document. Protect that. Put that in a safe place. Put it in a Ziploc bag. If you have to keep it on your person, protect it. But your ID, in a sense, is also digital and not exclusive to you. Well, it's exclusive to you, but it's not held by you alone. So, for example, if you have your TRN number and you are able to tell us what your TRN number is, we can go and check to verify that, this is a TRN number, and then we can go through a process of verifying who you are. So in other words, the loss of your TRN number does not mean you've lost your identification, because that's backed up somewhere in a safe database. So you need to be able to, if you can, memorize, but have copies of it. Keep those physical representation of your ID in a safe place. That's number one. Number two, we are not going to be able to give out the response, recovery grants and so forth without conducting some form of assessment first. So, I've met people who come and say, Prime Minister, my house mash up, I'm going to get nothing. And I would say, all right, have they come to assess your house? No, me not see nobody yet. But you don't need for that assess nothing, Prime Minister. See the house they mash up. Well, I am not the qualified assessor. So somebody has to literally come and check, because in a disaster, there are persons who will say, which we have situations where the social workers go out and somebody come and says, my house, this, and see it mashed down there, and take the person's number. And then when that person comes home from work now, the social worker is already gone. And then, they go to the ministry to say, I live at X address, and I heard you came by, but you didn't see me. And when the social worker checks the address, they say, no, but I came there and somebody claimed your benefit. So all kinds of shenanigans can happen in a disaster. So we must ensure that the systems of accountability continue to work even in a disaster. And as citizens, you can play your role by being informed and having your identification at hand. That's very important. As I move around the country, I do get the complaints that I haven't gotten yet, or they have assessed and I haven't gotten yet. I have applied and I haven't gotten yet. And when I check with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the other entities, many problems. Names are incorrectly spelled. The TRN numbers are incorrect. All kinds of issues with identifying. The phone numbers are not right. All kinds of issues. So as your responsibility, your duty to help yourself as a citizen is to make sure that your details are correct, so that it helps with the speed of the response. Now, as I shift from that to look at the humanitarian and the relief responses, we found that there were many challenges there from the report. The first challenge is that the lead in the humanitarian response, certainly in terms of the assessment, would be the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And they would need to have persons who are trained, social workers, to do this. We didn't have enough, because it meant pulling your social workers from their day job, their normal duties, to now go and transition into a disaster response function, which some of them may not be trained in, some of them may not have had experience in. And indeed, it is a very intense kind of operation. Some of them don't have the gears to do it, and some of them are victims of the disaster themselves. So what that caused was a delay in the response. And even if the response was mounted, it took a long time to reach to persons who needed it. So we're going to have to rethink how we create a body of assessors who can be easily mobilized with training, that should a disaster strike, we can mobilize them rapidly and have them in the field quickly and extensively, so that the citizen does not have to wait too long before a representative of the state reaches out to them. Now, the Jamaica Defense Force is the repository, let me put it another way, is the backup for everybody else in this regard. And the challenge is how to get all the entities that have prime responsibility, first responsibility for the disaster relief and the humanitarian relief, to coordinate effectively with the resources of the JDF. And so these are some protocols that we have picked up that needs to be worked out to ensure that we are in the field quickly and that we are responding quickly to the response. The other issue that we faced was we did not have a unified database of persons who were affected by the disaster. So what you found is that you could very well have duplication of effort. So someone could get a benefit from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, get a benefit from some other, from ADPEM or some other entity giving, and then go to the what we call the Food for the Poor, for example, who would go to the non-governmental entities that are also on the field of response. So we are looking at setting up a kind of centralized database where, at least in the first instance of the response, everybody can get at least once. Because what you find is that it is those citizens who are in the know and who are connected who will get 2, 3, 4, 5 times, while someone who is not in the know, not properly identified, not connected, gets nothing, but is out there being very critical of the system. That, see, nobody don't care about me. When that's not really the case. It's just how the system is organized, or rather not properly organized. And so one of the things that we're going to have to do is set up this kind of central database, which then leads me to the issue of technology. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the Ministry of Local Government, two prime entities we must embrace technology, certainly in terms of the digitalization and the establishment of the central database. That's absolutely critical if we're going to be able to distribute the humanitarian and recovery support in a quick and timely fashion. So that is something that we are working on and coordinating. But as I flew over the damaged areas the day after the hurricane hit, I had my notepad, and as I was flying over the coast, I was just marking one roof, and then strokes, so that's 5. In other words, I could do a rapid assessment just by flying over. And I suspect that the JDF does that and with their aerial capabilities. But there are far more efficient technologies using artificial intelligence that can scan areas and tell you which roof was damaged, the extent of the damage, and then you can use that data to make assessments as to how much should be assigned to persons. So in other words, the on-the-ground social worker coming to knock on your door and look, that effort could be enhanced greatly by the deployment of disaster assessment technologies using the available technologies through drones and artificial intelligence, which would give you rapid assessments, which would help to speed up the process of response. So this is something that we recommend strongly to the Jamaica Defense Force, the ADPEM, Ministry of Local Government. That capability needs to be integrated into our disaster response. So our telecommunication providers. Now, generally, I think Jamaica has a very, very robust telecommunication infrastructure. It has served us well. It has carried us through storms and are back up relatively quickly. But we have seen where they are vulnerable to criminal activity, particularly the theft of fuel, the theft of generators, the theft of copper and fiber, and sometimes even the repeaters. So that is a significant vulnerability. I know they have invested heavily in trying to secure the equipment that keeps the network running, but I think that the government must now create special legislation to place special harsher penalties on those persons who prey upon these critical infrastructure. Now think about it. Someone goes and steals, 50 gallon, 100 gallon of fuel. that repeater cell site goes down. The person who steals, gets whatever he gets. I don't know how much they'll get for that fuel. They probably sell it at half price. But everybody else is without. The commerce that doesn't get to go through, right? Somebody in an emergency need to call a hospital or get some emergency service. That one thief would have put an entire community at risk. And we cannot treat it as, him just thief some fuel. That level of thinking in our society where we make excuses for these kinds of acts, we must take that out of our mind. His act is not stealing from the telecommunication company. He's stealing from you. He's taking away your security and your safety. It is a criminal act against, essentially, a public service. And the level of punishment for that should be stronger for a greater deterrent effect. And so we are examining the legislation to improve that. So I think I've taken up a lot of your time in telling you what we're going to do, or what we have started, where the gaps are, and how we are correcting it. But I close by reinforcing the need for us to be on a footing of readiness. To say to you that we have seen the gaps, we know what the gaps are, which is the best thing, to be aware of what the gaps are. We have not been hit by a really, really serious hurricane for, maybe before Beryl, maybe 20 years or so. So we have not really had that kind of experience. We've been going through the kind of dry runs and practice runs. But because, our systems have become more complex, and we have not necessarily tested all of the systems, there are gaps. But the good thing is that we did the review, we are aware of what the gaps are, we are moving to correct them, and even if there were to be an event, we know how to change, how to move, how to maneuver, and what to be prepared for as we put in place the institutions to permanently close those gaps. So, in closing, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, has projected up to 19 named storms this season, with up to 5 potentially becoming major hurricanes. So the question is not whether a storm will come, but whether we will be ready. Preparedness saves lives, preparedness protects progress, and preparedness shortens recovery. So I want to leave you with this. Building resilience is about empowering our people, strengthening our systems, and preserving our development gains. We must not only bounce back, but we must bounce back higher, and we must bounce forward. So let us commit today as a united council, as a nation, to continue building the Jamaica that can withstand any storm, one that does not crumble under pressure, but rises stronger each time. Together, let us lead, prepare, adapt, and protect. Together, let us build a disaster-resilient Jamaica. Thank you for choosing Jamaica.
Let us thank one more round of applause for the Most Honorable Prime Minister, who gave the charge to the country. And we are expecting that as a council, we will take into consideration many of what the Prime Minister just spoke about in his presentation. So at this point, I will hand back to our permanent secretary. But just to say, Prime Minister, that the ADPEM initiated last year a hurricane strap program. And we are expecting this year to do the same by providing through the municipal corporations a couple thousand hurricane straps. We gave Minister Charles in Rocky Point last year a significant amount of hurricane straps, and this will be a part of the program of mitigation or relief that will be undertaken by the ADPEM. The discussions around the building approvals as it relates to how roofs are secured, Prime Minister, those discussions have commenced, and the building plan, the building plans that exist in the building code do also speaks to a specific area as to how construction around roofs must be done. But we will intensify those discussions as we go on, Prime Minister. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister, and also thank you, Prime Minister, for that detailed review and charge to the Council this morning. At this time, we have arrived at a break in the agenda for today, and this is the time that allows our distinguished guests and Prime Minister, who I believe also has another event to leave if so desires. However, for the second leg of the program, which is the business component, we will have presentations from respective agencies to commence with the ADPEM, Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, and of course our Met Office by our own Evan Thompson. Evan, you look far to the back, you need to come up front. We also have presentations from the Mines and Geology Division. We have heard Prime Minister spoke about our slope stability. And of course, an earthquake can happen at any time. The last big one, we were in this very room and there was a table right here, which I happened to fit under CABSEC. It wasn't too small. And I believe 2 other persons joined me under the table. And when I looked up, I said, if it's coming down, at least we have space under there for some oxygen. We don't have that today, so we pray there will be no earthquake. We also have presentations from the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security for those who are interested. This is perhaps one of the big ticket items, Minister Charles. And of course, we will have the Jamaica Public Service and Petrojam Jamaica Limited, or Petrojam Limited, to be exact. And thereafter, we'll have questions and answers. However, we might break it up a bit because it's a lengthy business segment. However, if you need to step down now is the time to do so while Mr. Thompson prepares to come. So we're not going to just take a break and stop. We'll just allow you to step out if you need to. But Prime Minister, if you would like to hear Mr. Thompson's comprehensive disaster management. Yes. Yes, sir. Yes. So that is it.